Hi everyone, welcome back. This video will be looking at the approaches to psychology, which will be tested in the paper 2 of the A-level exams. Obviously, like usual, subscribe, like, feel free to comment down below with any questions you might have, and I'm really happy to help. Yes, let's get into it. So looking at the origins of psychology, so psychology is the scientific study of the human mind and its functions, which was first developed by William Wundt in 1879, Germany. He introduced the process of introspection, which is a systematic method used to study the mind by breaking up conscious awareness into basic structures of thoughts, images and sensations. And Watson went on in the future to add scientific language, rigour and methods to psychology. And these two people here, Wundt and Watson, are the key founders of psychology and what it is nowadays. So the psychodynamic approach, which started in the 1900s, looks sort of at, this is including like Freud and things, so this approach looks at the idea that the unconscious mind controls many of our everyday activities, and part of this is defense mechanisms, which help prevent traumatic memories from the unconscious from reaching the conscious awareness, and obviously protecting ourselves emotionally and psychologically. These defense mechanisms act unconsciously to reduce anxiety, and there are 3 different types of them. So there's denial, which is obviously not accepting that something's happened. Repression, just ignoring it. And then displacement, the emotions from that event being targeted at something else. And then the personality is made up of the id, ego and superego. So the id is in the unconscious, and it's made up of selfish, aggressive instincts that requires immediate gratification. So obviously a small child, their id is very strong at this age, because obviously because their ego hasn't developed yet. That develops sort of at the age of like 2 to 3. And obviously the ego is the reality check that balances conflict between the id and superego, and again develops around the age of 2 years old. Whereas the superego is the moralistic part of the personality, which represents the ideal self, and sort of going back to sort of the conformity stuff in social influence, which is looked at in one of my other videos. Obviously people who are more likely to conform may have a larger superego, because obviously they'll have higher moral values. And then you've got Freud's psychosexual stages. So there's oral, in which the mouth is the focal point of the sensation. Anal, which is when the ego begins to develop. Phallic, this looks at more of the Oedipus complex. And I will just say, sorry, I forgot to mention, the numbers on the table are just the age of like years old that will begin to develop. So like, for example, the phallic, that develops between the ages of 3 and 6. You've got latent, which is from the ages of 6 to 12, and this is when the conflicts of previous stages becomes repressed. And then after 12, you've got the genital stage, which just generally helps lead us towards adult life. And obviously, from the psychodynamic approach, it helped develop psychoanalysis. However, this is gender biased, because Freud was very much focused on males, and obviously his psychosexual stages which help develop psychoanalysis. So looking at the behaviourist approach, you've got classical conditioning, which is the process of learning by association, and was founded by Pavlov. These are both fairly sort of simple ideas to get a grasp of, but if you just look at the pictures on the right hand side, they're sort of fairly straightforward at explaining it. So with Pavlov's study, the dog salivated at the food and then was taught to associate a bell ringing with the food, so when the bell rang it started salivating. And then you've got operant conditioning, which is the process of learning through consequences. So you've got positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement and punishment, and this was looked at by Skinner. So specific consequences became associated with a voluntary behaviour. So if they did a good behaviour, the rat got rewarded with food, and then if it did bad behaviour, it was punished in some way. Obviously, this is the treatment for phobias. These studies conducted by Skinner and Pavlov are lab experiments, but obviously because they're animal studies, it's hard to generalise the research to humans. The humanistic approach, which is about the 1950s, so it looked at sort of the ideas of free will, which is the ability to act at one's own discretion, and was developed by Maslow, who created the hierarchy of needs, as there is on the right-hand side here, and Rogers looked at the self. So self-actualization is the final stage of Maslow's hierarchy, and is the drive to realise one's true potential. So obviously, you can't move up the hierarchy before completing the one below. So you have to fulfil your physiological needs first, and then you need to fulfil your safety needs, and then your love and belonging needs, esteem, and then eventually you would reach self-actualization, where you've reached your true potential. And then Rogers looked at the idea that people feel more self-worth if there is a little difference between the self, who they actually are, and the ideal self, who they want to be. So this sort of links in with Maslow's hierarchy, is that people will feel more self-worth the closer they are to the self-actualization at the top of the triangle. Obviously this links to economic development and counselling as well, because obviously it will help create stages of where to work with a patient in counselling. However, it is unrealistic. What is the actual likelihood that you'll be able to fulfil all those things? Then you've got the cognitive approach, which was started in the 1960s, and this focuses on the way information is processed, treated, and our responses to this. So firstly, you've got a schema, which is a cognitive framework that helps to organise and interpret information in the brain. And I know that there's a few studies that it looked at on the psychology course. I can't think of what ones off the top of my head, but there are ones that focus a lot on negative schemas and things. And then you've got theoretical models, which act as simplified pictorial representations of a particular mental process based on current research evidence. You've got computer models, which are when computer analogies are used as a way to represent human cognition. An example of this is the working memory model, as is being represented as a temporary workspace. And then you've got cognitive neuroscience, which is an area of psychology dedicated to the underlying neural basis of cognitive functions. And part of this is using PET and fMRI. And obviously it's a really scientific approach, looking at the cognitive neuroscience and the computer models. However, it does tend to ignore emotions, because, for example, with the computer models, computers don't have emotions, so the emotion of a human is not counted into those models. So you've got social learning theory next, which started in the 1960s as part of the behavioural approach. They started by Bandura, who believed that we learn through observing others and imitating rewarded behaviour. So firstly, you've got modelling, which is when individuals learn a particular behaviour by observing others. And then you've got imitation, which is the act of using someone or something as a model and copying their behaviour. And I will just make it clear that the difference between modelling and imitation that some people may miss is the fact that modelling is just learning the behaviour, but imitation is actually carrying it forward and completing the behaviour. Identification is a form of influence, so they're linking back to the social influence topic again in paper 1, where when an individual adopts an attitude or behaviour because they want to be associated with a person or group. Then you've got vicarious reinforcement, which is when you learn a behaviour by observing someone being reinforced for it, which links back to, obviously because it's part of the behavioural approach, it links back to the operant conditioning studied by Skinner. And then lastly, you've got the mediational processes, which refer to the mental processes that exist between environmental stimuli and the individual's response. And then a study that's really, really important to learn, I think, is Bandura's study, and he got children to either observe aggressive or non-aggressive adults with a life-size Bobo doll. Sorry, that says Bob doll, it's meant to be Bobo doll. And then he found that the children who observed the aggressive model reproduced aggressive behaviour, whilst those shown non-aggressive models showed no aggression towards the Bobo doll when they were let into a room sort of full of toys. And obviously this can help explain criminal behaviour, but maybe it's just a cause. Is there like really a causal relationship there, or is it just a nonsense correlation that doesn't quite fit? So we've got the biological approach, which started in the 1980s as obviously technology got better and knowledge got better of biology. So looking at the gene, which is part of the chromosome of an organism that carries information in the form of DNA. And then, so you've got the genotype, which is the genetic makeup of an individual. However, you then got the phenotype, which is the observable characteristics of an individual affected by the environment. So genotype, you can have any gene, but phenotype is actually what comes forward in those genes. Then the biological approach looks at the role of the brain and the nervous system as well. So the cerebrum makes up 85% of the brain, and these sort of furthered knowledge into biology at this time led to the ideas of neurochemistry, which is the study of chemical and neural processes associated with the nervous system. And then we have a better understanding of neurotransmitters, which affect how much of a hormone is in your bloodstream, as they help to carry information across your synapses. And then this has led to the sort of usage of antidepressants, but is fairly reductionist. It's very simple. Biology is a lot more complicated than it is described in this approach. Then lastly, we are comparing the approaches and looking at gender bias. So there's a brief table here, just I'll let you guys read through it, I'm not going to babble on about it, but there's just a table here comparing different factors of each approach that we just looked at, so like what their main view is, and then whether they believe in nature or nurture, or both, and then how they feel towards the scientific methods used in psychology. And then looking at the gender bias, which is just at the bottom of the screen. So Mustian and Marasek, I'm really sorry if I said those wrong, I'm so bad at pronouncing names, but they said that there was two types of gender bias. So alpha bias, which is the tendency to exaggerate differences between men and women, and then there's beta bias, which is the opposite, so the tendency to ignore differences between genders. And their work was sort of aimed towards universality within all theories. So I hope you liked this video, I hope you found it really helpful. Obviously good luck in your exams if they are coming up. You're all going to smash it. And again, feel free to comment down below with any questions you have. If there's any exam questions you want help with, then just let me know and I can give you some support. Thank you guys.